have no idea at this time. Basically, I'm waiting on the toxicology report. I don't know. I don't know. When I got there, he was being brought out on a stretcher. And once they went to the hospital with my son, I immediately went in the house and started praying. Happy, because I don't think he'd ever had just all of them.
Yeah, he's like in a mental facility right now.
The silence around rich Homie Quan's family didn't break overnight. It cracked under pressure. As rumors multiplied, timelines filled with clipped quotes, reaction thumbnails, and confident claims built on fragments. The focus drifted away from music and memory and locked onto family allegations that spread faster than context could keep up. In that climate, the decision by Quan's father to speak out carried weight before a single sentence landed. This was not a victory lap, not a media rollout, and not a performance for clicks. It read like a boundary being drawn after weeks of watching strangers script a private history. The words arrived steady, careful, and heavy with restraint, aimed less at stirring debate and more at slowing it down. Online culture thrives on immediacy, but grief moves at a different speed. When speculation becomes sport, silence gets misread as confirmation, and families get cornered into responding. The statement confronted that reality without theatrics. It acknowledged pain without packaging it as spectacle. It pushed back against the idea that proximity equals guilt and reminded listeners that families are ecosystems shaped by years, not headlines shaped by hours. The allegations, repeated and reshaped across platforms, had begun to harden into assumed truth. Speaking out became a way to interrupt that hardening before it settled permanently. The tone mattered. Calm replaced outrage. Precision replaced accusation. Instead of naming villains, the message named consequences. It pointed to the cost of careless commentary, the way narratives snowball when accuracy loses the race. The father's voice didn't promise answers to every question, because real life rarely supplies them on demand. What it offered was context, something the algorithm rarely rewards. It reframed the moment from scandal to humanity, insisting that remembrance should not be crowded out by rumor. This opening chapter set the stakes clearly: a family under scrutiny, a legacy at risk of distortion, and a refusal to let grief be edited into entertainment. Within the culture, moments like this often trigger a rush to assign roles, heroes, suspects, and endings. That rush ignores timelines, ignores relationships, and ignores the slow work of understanding.
I grew up without my father, so I knew that if I ever had kids, I was going to be in their lives. And I've been in his life since day one up until he passed. So yeah, we had a unique bond, you know.
He also was a father, right?
Yes, he has 5 kids. I have 4 grandsons and 1 granddaughter. And he just started to gravitate to being a father. We had just had a conversation and he told me, "Dad, you know, I'm getting this parenting thing down now."
The statement resisted that pull by centering restraint as strength. It suggested that truth is not louder when shouted, only clearer when handled carefully. By choosing measured language, the father challenged the expectation that grief must perform to be believed. He also challenged the idea that families owe the public a complete accounting of private pain. The opening message asked for patience without pleading for it. It asked for accuracy without scolding. And it asked for memory to take precedence over rumor. In doing so, it reframed the conversation away from speculation and toward responsibility, signaling that what happens next depends as much on the audience as on the story itself. That expectation sets the tone for everything that follows, reminding observers that attention carries power, repetition creates belief, and silence can be misused when empathy is absent and urgency replaces care within public conversation cycles online today now.
Unique relationship because we were father and son, but we had a we called each other my best friend. We spoke daily. We spoke several times. The day before he passed, I looked at my phone. We were on the phone like 11 times.
Once the statement circulated, the temperature of the conversation changed, but the pressure did not disappear. Reactions arrived in waves, split between empathy and suspicion, revealing how conditioned audiences have become to treat grief as a puzzle. Some listeners heard a father protecting his family and honoring his son. Others scanned every sentence for omissions, convinced that meaning lives only in what is not said. This response pattern exposed a larger problem within digital culture, where interpretation often outruns information. Family allegations thrive in that gap, growing stronger with repetition, even when evidence remains thin. The father addressed this environment indirectly by refusing to match its speed. He spoke with intention, acknowledging complexity rather than simplifying it into blame. Families, he explained, are rarely clean narratives, especially when fame magnifies stress, expectations, and unresolved conflict. That admission mattered because it rejected perfection without accepting accusation. The confession emphasized boundaries at a moment when boundaries had been ignored. It challenged the assumption that visibility erases privacy and that public interest justifies intrusion. By choosing not to disclose intimate details, the message drew a clear line between explanation and exposure. That choice frustrated viewers hungry for revelations, but it grounded the statement in principle. It suggested that truth does not require total access and that restraint can be a form of respect. The father's tone carried fatigue more than anger, disappointment more than defensiveness. That emotional register shifted the frame from confrontation to consequence. It highlighted how rumors do not land softly. They compound, especially when repeated by confident voices with large platforms. Another theme surfaced quietly: time. Grief unfolds unevenly, while online discourse demands instant clarity. The statement resisted that demand by allowing ambiguity to exist without apology. It reminded listeners that healing is not accelerated by speculation, and that families process loss on timelines invisible to audiences. In refusing to rush, the message exposed how urgency can become cruelty when it overrides care. It also underscored the danger of equating silence with guilt. Silence, in this context, was presented as survival, not evasion.
No, I'm like everybody else. I have to wait and see. I don't want to speculate. I stand on principles. I stand on values. I won't lie. I won't lie. And if it's something that can...
Speaking out became necessary only after silence had been misused by others to construct certainty. The reaction revealed as much about consumption habits as it did about the situation. Clips were isolated, captions sharpened, and commentary layered on top of commentary. The original message risked being drowned out by its echoes. Yet its core persisted, a request for measured engagement, not agreement, not absolution, but accuracy. By centering that request, the father reframed the role of the audience. Viewers were no longer passive observers. They were participants whose sharing choices shaped outcomes. The confession asked them to recognize that power and wield it carefully. In doing so, it moved the conversation away from spectacle and toward responsibility, insisting that attention once given should be guided by empathy, verification, and respect rather than impulse. This insistence reframed listening as an ethical act, reminding communities that restraint protects people, preserves memory, and prevents harm from spreading further online today. As the conversation continued, the divide in public response became more pronounced, revealing how deeply entertainment logic has shaped the way sensitive stories are consumed. Emotional statements were no longer heard as expressions of grief, but treated as evidence to be weighed, challenged, and ranked. The father's confession existed inside a system that rewards certainty over nuance, even when nuance is the only honest option. In that system, complexity feels unsatisfying, and restraint feels suspicious. The statement pushed against that current by refusing to simplify family dynamics into digestible blame. It acknowledged that households shaped by pressure and visibility often carry unresolved tension, but it rejected the idea that tension automatically translates into wrongdoing. That distinction was critical, even if it was uncomfortable. The response also highlighted how grief is expected to look a certain way in public. Loud pain is validated, quiet pain is questioned, The father's measured delivery disrupted those expectations, forcing listeners to confront their own assumptions. His calm did not signal indifference. It signaled control in a moment where control had been stripped away. By speaking deliberately, he reframed strength as composure rather than confrontation. That choice exposed a cultural reflex to equate volume with honesty, a reflex that often distorts reality. The confession made clear that truth does not need to shout to exist. Another layer of the reaction revealed the risks of narrative recycling. Once a version of events gains traction, it becomes self-sustaining, echoed by commentary channels, captions, and speculative breakdowns. Each repetition adds confidence, even if the foundation remains unverified. The father's statement attempted to interrupt that loop by recentering lived experience. He did not deny that pain existed within the family. He denied that outsiders could define its meaning. That refusal challenged the entitlement often assumed by online audiences, reminding them that observation does not equal understanding. The statement also functioned as a defensive legacy without turning defensive. Legacy in this context was not about accolades or chart positions. It was about memory, dignity, and the right to be remembered without distortion. The father emphasized that reducing a life to its most controversial moment does violence to everything that came before it. That reminder carried weight in a culture quick to compress lives into headlines. By insisting on a fuller picture, the confession resisted erasure through oversimplification. As commentary continued to swirl, the message retained its core purpose, slowing the audience down. It did not ask for loyalty or silence, it asked for care. It suggested that engagement should be guided by responsibility, not reflex. In doing so, it reframed the act of listening as participation, not consumption. The statement became less about defending against allegations and more about modeling how such moments should be handled. With restraint, clarity, and respect, it offered an alternative to outrage-driven storytelling, reminding viewers that how stories are shared can matter as much as the stories themselves in shaping outcomes long after attention moves elsewhere online today. With the initial shock fading, the broader implications of the father's statement began to surface, shifting the discussion from individual blame to collective responsibility. The conversation was no longer just about allegations or rebuttals, but about how narratives are formed and sustained in the digital era. Family allegations rarely remain confined to their origins. They are amplified by repetition, sharpened by opinion, and eventually treated as established truth. The father's message implicitly questioned that process, drawing attention to the machinery behind public outrage. By focusing on impact rather than accusation, he redirected attention to the human cost of careless storytelling. This redirection mattered because it exposed how easily empathy is sidelined when engagement becomes the primary goal. The confession highlighted the imbalance between public curiosity and private consequence. Audiences often experience stories as momentary entertainment, while families experience them as ongoing reality. That imbalance fuels a cycle where speculation feels harmless to observers, but devastating to those involved. The father's words challenged listeners to recognize that disconnect. He emphasized that while public figures may anticipate scrutiny, their families often absorb its harshest effects without preparation or protection. This observation resonated beyond the immediate situation, reflecting a pattern repeated across industries and communities. The statement became less about one family and more about a system that incentivizes intrusion. Another critical theme was restraint as resistance. In an environment that rewards escalation, choosing calm becomes a form of defiance. The father did not match the intensity of the rumors with equal intensity. Instead, he maintained composure, refusing to escalate a narrative already inflamed by speculation. That choice disrupted expectations and undermined the momentum of outrage. It suggested that not every accusation deserves amplification, and not every rumor warrants response. By modeling restraint, the confession offered an alternative approach to public pressure, one rooted in self-preservation rather than reaction. The statement also underscored the permanence of digital footprints. Once allegations circulate, they rarely disappear. They linger in search results, resurface in recommendations, and follow families indefinitely. The father's decision to speak can be seen as an attempt to anchor the narrative before it drifted further from reality. He was not trying to erase conversation, but to contextualize it. That distinction is important. Context does not silence discussion. It grounds it. By providing perspective without oversharing, he attempted to slow the erosion of truth caused by repetition without verification. Ultimately, the message reframed the role of the audience. Viewers were no longer neutral consumers. Their choices to share, comment, or speculate actively shaped the story's trajectory. The confession asked them to recognize that power and exercise it with care. It suggested that responsible engagement requires patience, verification, and empathy. In doing so, it transformed the conversation from reactive judgment to reflective consideration, reminding everyone involved that dignity, once lost, is difficult to restore, especially in spaces where attention moves faster than understanding ever can online today. Over time, the significance of the father's decision to speak settled into something larger than rebuttal. It became an effort to preserve legacy at a moment when legacy risked being rewritten by speculation. In hip-hop history, narratives often harden quickly, freezing artists and families inside single moments while erasing years of context. The confession pushed back against that compression. It reminded listeners that influence is not measured only in controversy, but in contribution, presence, and memory. By shifting focus away from allegations and toward remembrance, the statement attempted to realign attention with what endures beyond headlines. Legacy in this sense was not framed as image management. It was framed as protection of meaning. The father spoke about pride without turning defensive, about love without turning sentimental, and about loss without inviting voyeurism. That balance mattered. It prevented the message from sliding into performance while keeping it emotionally grounded. The confession suggested that honoring someone's life requires resisting the urge to define it by its most painful chapter. That idea challenged the algorithmic instinct to spotlight conflict above context. Another layer of the statement addressed permanence. Digital narratives do not fade naturally. They accumulate, resurface, and reshape public memory over time. The father's words functioned as a marker placed into that stream, an attempt to ensure that future retellings encounter resistance rather than unchecked assumption. He did not attempt to overwrite conversation, but to complicate it. Complexity, in this case, was not evasive. It was accurate. Families are not single stories, and grief does not unfold in clean arcs. The confession also illuminated the emotional labor demanded of families connected to public figures. While audiences move from topic to topic, relatives remain anchored in the aftermath. They carry questions they did not ask and defend against narratives they did not create. By speaking when he did, the father asserted agency in a process that often strips it away. That assertion was quiet but firm. It reclaimed space for humanity in a discourse that had grown abstract and detached. As reactions continued, the statement's restraint became its strength. It did not chase validation or attempt to control opinion. It simply placed a human perspective back into a conversation that had lost one. In doing so, it reframed remembrance as an active choice rather than a passive outcome. The message underscored that legacy is shaped not only by what is said, but by how carefully it is handled. That care, once modeled, invites others to mirror it. And even if the noise persists, the presence of that example alters the tone of what follows, reminding audiences that memory deserves stewardship, not exploitation, especially when loss intersects with visibility and public curiosity in modern culture today. This perspective stands as a counterweight to outrage cycles, emphasizing patience, verification, empathy, and proportion, and reinforcing that stories involving families demand care, discipline, and responsibility. Because once harm spreads digitally, reversal is rare, correction is slow, and emotional consequences linger far longer than attention ever after. In the final view, the father's statement stands less as an answer and more as a boundary, clearly defined and deliberately placed. It does not attempt to end discussion, silence critics, or control perception. Instead, it asserts that some lines should not be crossed, even in an era where attention rewards excess. The emotional confession reframed the situation away from accusation and toward accountability, not just for those involved, but for those watching. It reminded audiences that stories do not exist in isolation. They live inside families, histories, and consequences that extend far beyond a single moment of online interest. What made the message linger was its refusal to play into extremes. It did not beg for sympathy, nor did it posture as moral authority. It simply insisted on dignity. That insistence challenged a culture trained to flatten complexity into verdicts. In doing so, it highlighted how easily public curiosity can drift into harm when empathy is removed. The statement suggested that restraint is not weakness, and that silence, when respected, can protect rather than conceal. Speaking out became necessary only when silence was repeatedly rewritten by others with confidence but without care. The confession also served as a reminder of how legacies are shaped after the music stops playing. Long after charts fade and trends move on, what remains is memory. Memory is influenced by repetition, framing, and tone. By placing a grounded perspective into the public record, the father ensured that future retellings would encounter context instead of only conjecture. That act alone carries weight. It does not erase speculation, but it complicates it, forcing pause where there once was momentum. At its core, the message asked audiences to reconsider their role. Viewers are not just observers. Every share, comment, and reaction contributes to the direction a story takes. The confession emphasized that attention is not neutral. It shapes outcomes, reinforces narratives, and leaves marks that do not disappear when the next topic arrives. By drawing attention to this dynamic, the statement shifted responsibility outward, encouraging more deliberate engagement. Ultimately, the father's words reinforced a simple but often ignored truth. Humanity should come before headlines. Families deserve space to grieve without becoming subjects of entertainment. Artists deserve to be remembered for their contributions, not reduced to controversy. And audiences deserve stories that are handled with care rather than urgency. This closing chapter does not resolve every question, nor does it attempt to. Instead, it offers perspective in a space crowded with noise. If this breakdown helped bring balance, clarity, and respect to a conversation often driven by speculation, support responsible storytelling by hitting like and subscribing for more in-depth coverage that prioritizes context, accountability, and the people behind the names.